Basic economics. Supply. What determines the quantity in individual supplies? So, when running a business like Student Sweets, what do you think determines how much ice cream you supply?
I guess the price of ice cream would be a big factor, right?
Exactly. When the price is high, selling ice cream becomes profitable, so you supply more.
And if the price drops, then you would supply less, right?
Correct. That's known as the law of supply. As price rises, quantity supplied rises too.
What about the costs of making ice cream? Do they matter?
Absolutely. If input prices like cream or sugar go up, it becomes less profitable to produce, so you supply less.
So, if those costs rise too much, you might even stop making ice cream?
That's right. High input costs can lead to a decrease in supply or even shutting down the business.
What about technology? Does that play a role?
Definitely. Advances in technology, like mechanized ice cream machines, can lower production costs and increase supply.
And what if you think prices will go up in the future?
Good question. If you expect prices to rise, you might hold back some supply today to sell more later. The supply schedule and the supply curve. So, let's talk about the supply schedule. It's a table that shows how much of a product, like ice cream, is supplied at different prices.
Interesting. How does that work exactly?
Well, for example, at a price below $1, an ice cream seller, let's say Ben, won't supply any ice cream. But as the price rises, he supplies more.
Oh, I see. So, the higher the price, the greater the quantity supplied?
Exactly. This relationship is what we call the supply curve. It slopes upward because, ceteris paribus, a higher price means a greater quantity supplied.
That makes sense. But what about market supply? How does that differ?
Great question. Market supply is the total supply from all sellers in the market. For instance, if we combine Ben's supply with another seller, Jerry's, we get the market supply.
So, if one of them stops selling, the overall market supply would decrease, right?
Exactly. That's why market supply depends on various factors like the number of sellers, input prices, and technology used.
And the supply curve for the market is just the sum of the individual supply curves?
Yes. To find the total quantity supplied at any price, we add the individual quantities from the supply curves horizontally. Shifts in the supply curve. When the price of sugar falls, it becomes cheaper to produce ice cream because sugar is a key ingredient.
That makes sense. So, does that mean more ice cream will be made?
Exactly. When it's more profitable to sell ice cream, sellers are willing to produce a larger quantity. This shifts the supply curve to the right.
And if something happens that makes it more expensive to produce ice cream?
Good question. If input prices rise, like if sugar becomes more expensive, the supply curve shifts to the left because sellers will produce less at each price.
So, it's all about the costs of production affecting supply?
Yes, and there are several determinants of supply, like technology and the number of sellers in the market, that can also cause shifts in the curve. Supply and demand together. Market equilibrium occurs where the supply and demand curves intersect, which is where the market is balanced.
Oh, so that's where the price and quantity of goods are determined?
Exactly. For instance, if the equilibrium price for ice cream cones is $2, that's where sellers and buyers are satisfied.
What happens if the price is higher than that, like $2.50?
Good question. If the price is too high, suppliers produce more than buyers want, leading to a surplus.
So, they would have to lower the price to sell them?
Exactly. They'll keep lowering the price until they reach equilibrium again.
And what if the price is below the equilibrium, like $1.50?
In that case, demand exceeds supply, creating a shortage. Buyers will compete for the limited goods available.
So, sellers can raise prices until they balance out again?
Exactly. This process of adjusting prices continues until the market reaches equilibrium where everyone is satisfied. 3 steps to analyzing changes in equilibrium. So, we know that supply and demand determine a market's equilibrium, right?
Yeah, but how do we analyze changes in that equilibrium?
Great question. There are 3 steps we can follow to analyze these changes.
Okay, what's the first step?
First, we need to determine whether the event shifts the supply curve, the demand curve, or both.
Got it. And then what?
Next, we decide if the curve shifts to the right or the left. A right shift means an increase, while a left shift indicates a decrease.
That makes sense. And the last step?
Finally, we use a supply and demand diagram to see how the shift affects the equilibrium price and quantity.
Can you give me an example of a change in demand?
Sure, let's say there's a hot summer. This affects the demand for ice cream because people want more of it.
So, the demand curve would shift to the right, right?
Exactly. This shift raises the equilibrium price and quantity of ice cream sold.
And what about the supply curve? Does it change too?
No, in this case, the supply curve remains the same. The increase in price just leads to a higher quantity supplied along that curve.
Oh, I see. So there's a difference between a shift in supply and a change in quantity supplied.
Exactly. A shift in the supply curve indicates a change in supply, while movement along the curve reflects a change in quantity supplied. Now, let's talk about an example on change in supply, like ice cream market.
How does an earthquake affect ice cream?
Great question. When an earthquake destroys ice cream factories, it reduces the supply of ice cream. This shifts the supply curve to the left.
What happens to the price then?
As the supply decreases, the price goes up. For example, it could rise from $2 to $2.50, and the quantity sold might drop from 7 to 4 cones.
I see. So if both supply and demand change, how do we analyze that?
Good observation. If hot weather increases demand, while the earthquake decreases supply, both curves shift. The demand curve shifts right, and the supply curve shifts left. Finally, let's talk about an example on change in supply and demand.
What does that mean for the price and quantity of ice cream?
In this case, the price will definitely rise, but the quantity sold can either increase or decrease, depending on how much each curve shifts.
That sounds a bit complicated. How do I keep track of all that?
It can be tricky, but using supply and demand curves helps visualize the changes. You can refer to a table that summarizes the outcomes for different shifts.